Good afternoon this time. I'd like to welcome all of you to this session. I have the one woman brain trust, that is Emma Fryer, as my fireside chat companion. We know each other reasonably well, and we generally always have a good time. So we hope this will be both informative and maybe a bit of fun. So I'm Brian Clavin, again from Total Data Center Solutions. The topic of can data center be smarter in its most simplistic form is, of course, it can. Through the course of human endeavor, everything gets smarter, not without setbacks and not without some stupid moves, but generally the path of progress is in the right direction. But I wanted to open the session by saying, I think, it's my personal view, is that data centers are actually a lot smarter than people give them credit for, in the way that they kind of in stealth mode benefit society and to quite an extent the planet, the planet itself, through allowing the digitalization of the human economy, our social interactions, our entertainment, our healthcare, and so many other things. In my opinion, it has helped move things from physically having to move things to actually only having to move your fingertips to get important and otherwise energy intensive stuff done. And I just wanted to put that out there. And Emma, I wanted to ask you if you've got insights or opinions on that and whether or not you might agree.
Yes, I definitely do. I'm never short of opinions, actually, Brian. Great to be here. Yes, I mean, we've been discussing the ability of ICT and ICT-enabled solutions to help us address climate change and reduce carbon and dematerialize for well over the last decade. The first reports on this came out, I think, WWF in about 2004, 2005. I myself produced a thing called High Tech Low Carbon in 2008. The trick we missed there was we talked about ICT generally, and we didn't single out the infrastructure that underpinned it, data centers and obviously networks as well. But we didn't really place data centers front and central in this debate. But of course, none of these ICT-enabled technology solutions can happen without data centers. So they are this unseen, unappreciated underpinning infrastructure that allows it. And I think when I looked at this, I looked at the way that data centers and ICT more generally can help in combating climate change on three levels. And I called it enhance, enable, and transform. So enhance doing the things we already do, but more efficiently. Logistics, fantastic examples of software logistics that massively reduce waste in sort of fleet operations. Optimized lorry loads, optimized routes, those kind of things. Not actually changing what you do, still delivering stuff, but you just do it in a much smarter way. Then we've got things that I'd call enabling technologies, and they enable us to save energy by doing things in a different way. In silico testing and modeling is a great example of that. Electronic document management. You think about if you're ever asked to wet sign something now, your heart just sinks and you collapse into a heap because it's so much more difficult now than an electronic signing process. And then the third level was something that I call transformational, because these are technologies that lead to alternate carbon business models or low carbon business models, like the servitization. You're no longer selling product, you're now selling a service. So BAE Systems, I think it is, don't sell planes to the RAF, they sell flying hours, and those kind of things where we've turned things into a business model that improves circular economy, as well as it essentially aligns the incentive of supplier and customer much more closely than traditional business models would. So, and that was all quite widely recognised by things like the European Commission with their ICT for EE. We've seen lots of reports on that, Smart 2020, with really, really significant savings being identified from that. So yeah, absolutely massive impact in my view.
Fantastic, thank you. Hey, this is again kind of a macro view that I hold, and just wanted to throw it out there and see what you think. In the context of how data centers fit into society, I think the data center industry has a bit of an image problem. I mean, I think to the public, data centers are just giant soulless boxes where nothing but invisible electrons and the occasional human being wander in and out of. And I think we as an industry have been rather poor in explaining our place in the world that we now live in, and which data centers have had and continue to have a major role in shaping. And in addition to that, we, in having not failed, but having not optimized that interaction, I think we're also losing the chance to get new entrants into the employee base that want to deal with data centers. And I think that's showing in how difficult it is to get personnel. Just wanted to get your idea on that one.
Okay, I think we might have to dissect this into several chapters because it's huge. I think, firstly, it's important to recognize where the origin of data centers was. And it was really in the sense of providing business continuity to organizations like banks. It was about consolidating IT services so you could improve security, efficiency, resilience. It was entirely B2B facing. You think of the early co-location market in London, it was completely uninteresting to consumers. What we've had now is a whole series of massive changes. Firstly, you've had this enormous growth in demand for digitization, explosion as well in consumer-facing cloud services. So the rapid expansion means that the sites that used to be hidden away on industrial estates and that kind of stuff, they're now becoming visible. They're having to appear within communities, and they're bigger and they're more obvious. As we're having this, essentially larger, fewer sites, everything being consolidated. So they're more visible. We're also seeing public-facing, known names very active in this space, which obviously is going to alert interest. If you haven't heard of any of the people who are operating these sites, they're not interesting. Now you have. And then we've got another problem, which could be used to benefit, but not, which is clustering. So you're seeing everybody piling in to very specific locations. You've got obviously the tier 1 markets across Europe, and then within those, it's incredibly dense clusters. And the problem with clusters is they exacerbate the demand on things actually that people look at as important resources, water, power, and they'll ask legitimate questions about those things. And what I don't think we've done well, because we're used to being secretive and hidden away in industrial estates, we haven't made the transition from saying, actually, these are the things we do and this is why we're here. So I don't think we've had that conversation, and I don't think we're anything like strategic enough in the way that we integrate with those communities and with policymakers on those, actually being candid about what we're doing. I can talk more about this, but I think we can pick it apart together in a more interesting way.
Really interesting. Given that we've both been back in Ireland quite recently, and you can't get in a cab in Dublin without the driver slagging off data centers, it's quite topical. And given your comment just now around clusters of data centers, for whatever reason, the Irish data center market seems to have located massive clusters, Blanchardstown, City West, etc., in relatively rural areas. And as a consequence, given I'll call it the black eyes or the black marks that the Irish data center industry have thus far been given, I think they're missing a trick around reuse of their waste heat to be able to pipe it to the edge of these big complexes where there are lots of big residential developments going. I mean, if you want to get hearts and minds, imagine telling the people next door saying, how would you like free heat for the rest of your life, for free heat and hot water? Do you think that the Irish data center industry, it's almost a club, have the stomach for that sort of change to try and become good neighbors as opposed to being demonized?
I think they're very keen to be good neighbors. And I think the heat reuse is a really interesting one, because I'm not when I talk to data center operators, they're always willing to share their waste heat, but it does come with an overhead in terms of operational efficiency. So they need to know there's going to be an off-taker. So the barrier is not about, will we share our waste heat? Yes, and quite often we're happy to give it away. Certainly they do in the Netherlands, they give it all away for free, but you need an off-taker, because if you're going to set up your data center, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this, my understanding is there is this operational overhead to that, and you don't want to then run that data center suboptimally from an energy efficiency perspective if there isn't an off-taker. So that's all about having strategic conversations with multiple developers at the same time. And I can't speak for Ireland because I'm not familiar with the market as I am in the UK. But in the UK, some really interesting conversations going on in West London. So I always get this the wrong way around. OPDC, which is essentially Old Oak Common and Park Royal Development Corporation, the planning authority for this area, which is an absolute data center magnet in West London. They're trying to coordinate heat off takers, heat users and heat providers, aka data centers, within that area. So they're trying to talk to people at the planning stage, the development stage of both, to try and get that and to try and get it, part funded. So it's about pulling people together for strategic conversations, because that, to me, is where it's gone wrong in the past. And certainly in the UK, I'm aware of large sites that were required to provide waste heat to edge of site by the planning authority. They did that. Someone came along and built next to it. Planning authority didn't think to tell the developer, and the waste heat has never been used. And that's real. So it's not an unwillingness to be a good citizen and to contribute to, and some of the community development initiatives I've seen are absolutely superb. I mean, really first rate. They don't often talk about it, which I think is a shame, but certainly qualitative, well-funded, well thought out community development programs are underway, especially in terms of employment and things like that. So it's not, I don't think it's that they're trying, that they're not trying. It's not that they're not trying or not willing. It's that we're not having the conversations at the right strategic level with the right parties involved.
Interesting. Just a little anecdote on Ireland, and it's kind of a counterpoint to their not great image. I was on a data center visit a few weeks ago, and they're doubling the size of the overall facility. And one of the things they've got on site is a rainwater attenuation pond, which is surrounded by trees and a little woods and that sort of thing. And what the intention of the person who's in charge of sustainability for the entire European REIT is planning on doing is to engage with the local school systems and turn the attenuation pond and the surrounding area into a bit of a nature reserve, build an on-site hut, wire up some CCTV that kids can watch remotely, etc., but also hopefully to get some waste heat from the data center in to warm the observation hut. And although it's just a small thing, I thought, what a great first step in the right direction to get a hearts and minds exercise underway. Well, I mean, in the big picture, it will cost them nothing. They should get great points with the young, the very young, who will hopefully influence the grumpy parents and cab drivers that they're not, that at least data centers aren't all bad. Anyway, we move on. So back to a more technical version of what a smarter data center can look like. There probably, if we went to put it on a spreadsheet, there'd be thousands of lines of how we could do things smarter. So in terms of trying to simplify it slightly, I thought maybe if we create sort of buckets of types of stuff that can all get piled together for the purpose of this call. And my buckets are, for a better or worse, is smarter stuff. And that would be things like smarter servers, smarter air handling, perhaps immersion cooling, reuse of data center heat, etc., via various exchangers, etc. And then you've got what a slightly more erudite version, which is smarter coding and software. And that would be from, in simplistic forms, is why were you able to take either Excel or Word and on a little 3.5-inch floppy disk and download it? And now it's just millions and millions of lines of code, and you can only download it via the web. And is it really something that has taken us any further, all those extra millions of lines of code? Has it really changed our work lives? So that's just kind of an idea. And the last one is smarter operations. And again, that would come down to higher operating temperatures, higher CPU utilization, waste heat reuse, AI to optimize the compute stack, etc. So in terms of those three buckets, do you want to address one or more of those just in terms of your thoughts? Again, with the underlying premise or the underlying question is, how can data centers be smarter?
Okay, so I love that. I love your thing about the functionality. I tried to buy my mum a smartphone. And I said, look, I just want a phone that will make phone calls, send text, and do WhatsApp. and you cannot. And can it have buttons that look like buttons, please? You know, this is for someone who's 85. And bearing in mind that, you know, a significant proportion of wealth is held by the over 55s or over 60s, it might seem worthwhile developing a product that people over 70 can actually use, and it's just not available. So I think it's got to have the gizmos, it's got to have the bells and whistles, and actually most of the stuff is completely, you know, completely irrelevant and just confusing, you know, because they'll start stuff up they don't realize and all the rest of it. Anyway, so that's an interesting one. So I think my take on this, and I love your buckets actually, and I'm really glad you haven't cornered me on anything technical, because most people who know me know I'm not super technical. I'm policy wonk by background. But I think there's several things. One is about just a data center is a system of systems. So you've always got to have a systems level approach. You know, you could have the most efficient everything together in the data center and it won't operate efficiently if you're not running it as a system. So I think that's the point, and everybody knows that in the sector. So I don't want to teach grandmothers to suck eggs. But I also think we need to leverage the infrastructure itself better in terms of, you know, you look at power provisioning and the sort of tragedy of the commons you see in the power provisioning discussions that go on, where everybody knows there's this sort of constraint on power. So everybody tries to get the maximum possible amount of power they will ever need, ever. Yeah. And then you cannot share or sublet that capacity until you use it. You may never use it. There's so much scope for load balancing. There's so much scope for making the data center a prosumer in the grid. I mean, I am always, you know, wringing my hands in the way that we probably have in the UK, at least 2 gigawatts in terms of embedded emergency power. And of course, it's diesel, so we can't use it. So I'd love to do something about that. And we also can't use it, even if it weren't diesel, even if it were HVO, we still couldn't use it because of the air quality impacts, which are quite similar, irrespective of what you burn in terms of NOx. The other way I think the sector can really contribute is as early adopter, is the sort of being the bleeding edge of developing and testing new renewable technologies. You know, you look at the adoption of PPAs by the large providers. You look at the interest we're already seeing in making facilities hydrogen ready. They've also got to work out where that hydrogen, that green hydrogen, is going to come from. It's another question. And those kind of things in terms of, you know, how you essentially take that hit so others can follow you. And I think that is a role that we are seeing the sector play in terms of renewables adoption and as I said, R&D. And I also have seen some really interesting ways in which some of the larger operators are using their data centers as fleets. They're not having them all cookie cutter. They're saying, okay, well, look, we will concentrate, say, our transactional activity in 1 or 2 data centers where we will up the resilience, and therefore the, you know, we have to operate at lower efficiency, and then we'll run the others at a much lower level of resilience because we can, because it's not necessary. And using that, the leverage you can get with a fleet, I think, is also pretty smart. And some of the larger operators have done that, and I've been really impressed to see that.
Excellent, excellent. Hey, just back to the data centers image. We both attended DCD Connect about a month ago. And unknowingly, we went to the same session. And there was a gentleman on the panel of 3, I think there were 3 and a moderator, who said that the data center industry, it was his opinion, that the data center industry needs to make a choice. Going forward to craft its image in a positive way, it can take either the path of alcohol or tobacco. And you and I both, when we stood in this prep session that we had a few days ago, we both were just, that was such a eureka moment in the clarity of the cleavage point between how do we move forward. Do you want to just articulate a little bit more about that?
Yes, so I think what was meant there, well, it was very clear, is that, you know, tobacco was taken a totally defensive approach to government intervention and criticism, and therefore it is it's now kind of, in a sense, entirely negatively viewed. Whereas alcohol has worked with government, it's accepted that there are issues, it has worked around to ensure that one can try and ensure that people are moderate in their drinking habits, that they're alcohol aware, those kind of things, and therefore alcohol is still viewed positively within society. I think actually you articulated it far better than I did. but but I think
that's the exception to the rule. Well done.
but I think, and it's a really interesting to me, because actually what I am seeing, and it's really interesting about data centers, because actually that is, I think, what the sector started to do. And if you look at things like the Climate Neutral Data Center Pact, they've worked proactively with the Commission, on the European Commission, in trying to develop, and address the issues that the Commission is finding most problematic with data centers, and do it in a self-regulatory way. And that it's not easy. I mean, it is not easy, because they're also developing metrics at the same time. But it means they're having a completely different conversation with the policymakers. And 10 years ago, we would sort of be shouting at each other. This is, the industry and the policymakers, across a kind of chasm of misunderstanding. And now I'm seeing far higher level in terms of engagement, and a much, much better level of technical competence among policymakers about data centers. So I think that we're seeing that already with data centers. We are doing that, and I'm delighted to see that. And there are several very significant self-regulatory initiatives going on, or industry commitments. And I think that's all to the good, because the industry is trying to pile in and have those conversations positively with government. I'm encouraged.
Thank you. So we're going to go to Q&A shortly, but in terms of the data center's part in what I call the digital life support system that we all rely so relentlessly on, is there one thing that you'd like to leave with the audience today as a takeaway to incorporate into their professional lives and their interactions, both with their employers and with their customers?
I think so. I think there's an only connect here. We have to learn to see ourselves as others see us, and communicate on their terms. And when I arrived in the data center sector, I found it really hard to get my head around it. I mean, I really did. So I tended to use analogies. Is a data center, how is it contribute to economy? Is it like a train? Yeah, it's like a train. Okay, it pulls behind it this great supply chain, and it has passengers who are all the customers, and it improves, you can see it. Or, how do the different levels of service, these different service levels in the data center, from, property to wholesale to retail co-location, all the way up. Well, it's a bit like a sherry trifle with all these different levels of service, and you can eat the whole thing together, or you can take levels, or you can provide levels. And that really matters to me. And I think it's, at the moment, we're having a discussion about, what does smart do? And to me, you take a phone, you do phone calls on it. If it's a smartphone, it stops being a phone. It becomes a TARDIS. It becomes a portal to the internet. It becomes a portal. It's a door to a data center, or many thousands of data centers. So it's about, I think, use analogies that people understand, and also be proud of what we've done. I mean, you look at what this sector did during COVID. Everywhere went online within 10 days, and we had something like 200% increase in uptake of online platforms. Now, if we had a 200% uptake in the demand for toilet paper in that time, we would have been dead in the water.
I think we did, Emma. I think we did, if you remember the empty shelves.
Well, we only used the same amount, though, didn't we? What happened is people decided they'd rush out and buy it.
Good
So we didn't need any more. We just decided. And also the fact that, that led to better government recognition and support. But also, we developed a vaccine in 10 months because we had the compute power. That would have taken 10 years. We need to be proud of what we've done and get it out there. So there's two things. Sorry, only connect and be proud.
Fantastic. I will leave it in very simplistic terms, which is from my previous presentation, which is, I think the data center industry and each of you on the call should take a really serious look at BESS and BESS plus solutions and see how they can materially improve your bottom line and your carbon footprint. Do we have time for any questions?
Thanks, guys, very much. That's really insightful. Just quickly, really, going back, it's something I'd quite like to cover if we can. I don't know if you'll be able to shed any light on it, but as we weren't able to have our skills gap discussion earlier today, just going back to what you were talking about earlier, improving the data center's image and things like that. Does kind of shifting to a smarter data center kind of open the opportunity to cross-skill people from other areas of employment and attract potential the next generation into the industry? What's your say on that?
So yes,
if I can just start, I don't see a natural pull through. I see that we have to help people understand that the great careers you can have in data centers, and that they aren't just soulless empty boxes with electrons and an occasional human being. But I don't see a natural pull through from some of the other initiatives. I think we've got to do a root and branch review of how we attract them from other places. And again, it's a competitive world. We have to make the case of why the data center industry is more interesting than any other industry that you want to name. So I don't see any natural pull through. Emma?
I'm a bit more optimistic. We did a schools outreach last year, which was absolutely fascinating. And the questions that came from the kids were, I'll have to say, instructive. Does the grid run through? Does the internet run through the electricity grid? And what does my smartphone have to do with the data center? I like those two. We dealt with them. But I think what we need to do is to demonstrate the variety of jobs in the sector. And actually, we did that. I put up a whole website, a web page, showing, because people think, oh well, if you want to work in a data center, you need to be a data programmer and you need to have a ponytail. Neither of which are true. And so we just, there are jobs right across from transactional advisory, professional services, construction, energy efficiency, and you name it. There are, such an incredible variety of jobs, and we need to explain that. I think the other thing we need to do a better job of, which I think we are not succeeding as well as we could, is when people want to transfer from other sectors. We're a sector where very few people decided they wanted to work in a data center at the age of 15. They come in from other sectors, oil and gas, manufacturing, and there are plenty more sectors where we could get people with very easily transferable attributes. And we're too focused as a sector on having, 25 years experience in critical environments. And what we need to do is be readier to recognize attributes rather than those specific technical, because we can train people up in that. So I think the sector needs to be readier, but also we need to be, there are loads and loads of very exciting jobs in data centers, huge variety of them. And we need to make sure we remind people of that, because the perceptions are that there's only a very limited number of sort of routes through, and there aren't loads of entry points, loads of routes. So I am optimistic, but again, it's going to take work.
That seems to be the main thing that's come out of today, that it's got a lot of work ahead of us. Okay, I'm mindful of the time. I know people are eager to get to lunch and so forth. So all I have to say, thank you so much for both of you joining us today and sharing your knowledge. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks very much indeed.
Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.